Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we have another Commander's Guild deck tech. This one is titled Chandle with Care. And if you haven't seen this show before, what we're doing is we are randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com, working with a budget of $100 or less, and building a deck around a theme of the chosen card. So this week's card was another suggested card, this one by Shawn, who is a regular player on this channel, so you may have seen him in some videos before. He is actually in the video that we will show today, and the card that he suggested was Chandler. So Chandler is a 4 and a red for a summon legend. I believe he's been errated to just be a human. For a 3/3, and you can pay red, 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 tap, destroy target artifact creature. So obviously, if we have Chandler as our random card of the week, our commander is also Chandler. So this is a super unique card. I wasn't quite sure what to do with this card when I first built it, but I think we went into a pretty unique direction, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I am interested to see how it plays out, but obviously we care about our opponents having artifact creatures, which is a little bit tough because we can't force our opponents to have artifact creatures. Or can we? Now, keeping that in mind, let's take a look at some themes. The first of which is we want to be able to turn our opponent's permanents into artifacts. They could be any permanent. So Liquimetal Torque, for example, 2 mana, artifact, taps for a colorless, or taps and target non-land permanent becomes an artifact in addition to its other types until end of turn. So we can activate this to target our opponent's creatures, turning them into artifacts, which means that we can then kill them with Chandler, which turns Chandler basically into a triple red removal spell for any creature on the board. Obviously not ideal, not what we always want to be doing, but it's a phenomenal way to make good use of our commander. Second is we want to be able to turn specifically any artifact into a creature. So Liquimetal Torque would let us turn a creature into an artifact, but we want to turn any artifact into a creature since Chandler only cares about artifact creatures. So Karn the Great Creator is a 4 mana planeswalker, legendary planeswalker, Karn. 5 loyalty. Activated abilities of artifacts your opponents control can't be activated, which is already super useful, especially combined with something like Liquimetal Torque. And until your next turn, up to 1 target non-creature artifact becomes an artifact creature with power and toughness each equal to its converted mana cost. Perfect, that's exactly what we want to be doing. And then it also has the added benefit of -2, you may choose an artifact card you own from outside the game or in exile, reveal that card and put it into your hand. So in Commander there are no sideboards, so the outside the game part doesn't matter, but if something gets exiled we can get it back. And the important part about this is we can turn any of our opponent's artifacts into creatures. So Soul Rings, Mana Rocks, whatever they've got, they become creatures. Chandler shoots them down. And then finally, our last theme for this deck is a little bit odd considering our other two themes here, but it's actually going to be treasure tokens. Because Chandler has such an expensive ability, and he's a 5 mana commander in himself, we needed a way to ramp. And one of the best ways to ramp in red was treasure tokens. And so we have Magda Brazen Outlaw here, 1 in a red for a legendary creature, Dwarf Berserker. 2/1, other dwarves you control get +1/+0. Whenever a dwarf you control becomes tapped, create a treasure token and sacrifice 5 treasures. Search your library for an artifact or dragon card, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Now we don't have a ton of dragons, we do have a couple, but Magda's ability to get artifacts is incredibly important. That can get us our Liquimetal Torque, that can get us a couple of our other combo pieces, which we'll talk about later, or just any other number of cards that can turn artifacts into creatures or creatures into artifacts. And then the production of treasure, super useful for trying to ramp out some of our bigger things. So with the themes out of the way, let's take a quick look at some key cards, talk about what we really want to see in this deck. The first of those cards is Goblin Welder, 1 red mana for a 1/1 Goblin Artificer. Tap, choose target artifact a player controls and target artifact card in that player's graveyard. If both targets are still legal as this ability resolves, that player simultaneously sacrifices the artifact and returns the artifact card to the battlefield. This is an incredibly useful ability, especially when we look at our treasure theme in the deck. We're able to sacrifice a treasure to return basically any artifact from our graveyard to our hand. And sometimes we are going to have artifacts that sacrifice themselves or sacrifice other artifacts to kind of trigger what we want to do. So Goblin Welder is a phenomenal way to keep recurring some of our pieces if they wind up in the graveyard. Our second key card, Scrap Mastery. 3 red for a sorcery. Each player exiles all artifact cards from their graveyard, then sacrifices all artifacts they control, then puts all cards they exile this way onto the battlefield. So this is essentially like a living end for artifacts. We wipe the entire board of artifacts and then replace them with any artifacts that are in the graveyard. Now, I'm sure this could help our opponents, but ideally it's going to wind up helping us a lot more. We're able to put a lot of artifacts in the graveyard and then just bring them all back at once, get tons of value, and keep rolling. And then finally, our last key card is going to be By Force. X and a red for a sorcery, destroy X target artifacts. This doesn't seem super relevant, but with the fact that we're able to turn a lot of our opponent's things into artifacts, this can very quickly just become X and a red, destroy X permanents on the battlefield, which, especially since we're in mono red, is an incredibly powerful ability. So being able to shoot down lands, being able to shoot down creatures or regular artifacts, enchantments, planeswalkers, whatever might be on the board, By Force is an all-star when it comes to destroying things that we need to see gone. So that is the themes, the key cards. There are some cool interactions in this deck, some cards that work super well together, and I do want to highlight some of those, especially because there are some cards in here that when I was building this deck, I had no idea even existed. So the first pair of cards I want to talk about are Liquimetal Coating and Toy Maker. So Liquimetal Coating, very similar to Liquimetal Torque, 2 mana for an artifact, tap, target permanent becomes an artifact in addition to its other types until end of turn. So we can just straight up turn any permanent on the battlefield into an artifact. And then with things like Toy Maker, which is 2 mana for an artifact creature spell shaper, 1/1, we can pay 1, tap, discard a card from our hand, and target non-creature artifact becomes an artifact creature with power and toughness each equal to its converted mana cost until end of turn. So Liquimetal Coating taps, turns, say, our opponent's land into an artifact. Toy Maker, then pay 1 mana, tap, discard a card. We turn that artifact land into an artifact creature with 0 power and 0 toughness, so it immediately dies. These can be used to destroy a land. They can be used to animate a creature, turn a creature into an artifact that can then be destroyed by Chandler. This can turn planeswalkers or enchantments into artifact creatures, which can then be destroyed by Chandler, or they could just be destroyed by Force or any other various artifact destruction spells in the deck. So I had never heard of Toy Maker before this, so I definitely wanted to highlight it because I think it's a very cool card, very unique, and so I'm very happy that we were able to find it for this deck. And then our second cool interaction is between Treasure Chests and Trash for Treasure. So Treasure Chest, 3 mana for an artifact, pay 4, sacrifice Treasure Chest, roll a d20. If you roll a 1, you lose 3 life. 2 through 9, create 5 treasure tokens. 10 through 19, gain 3 life and draw 3 cards. And a 20, search your library for a card. If it's an artifact, you may put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, put that card into your hand, then shuffle. And if we pair that with Trash for Treasure, 2 and a red, for a sorcery, as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice an artifact, and return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So Treasure Chest is a bit of a weird card, a bit of a unique card. It's got a lot of different possible outcomes, but one of those outcomes is to create 5 treasure tokens. If that were to happen, we can use one of the treasure tokens to then sacrifice to Trash for Treasure, returning Treasure Chest to play. And even if we don't get the treasure tokens with treasure chests, we can always use some of the other treasures we have laying around. We can use some other artifacts that are laying around. But being able to sacrifice treasure chest, get its ability, and then bring it back and do it again is incredibly powerful, because as long as we don't roll a 1, obviously, all of these are stuff that we want to be doing. We would love to have treasure tokens. We would love to gain 3 life and draw 3 cards. We would love to put an artifact card onto the battlefield for free from our deck. Everything about treasure chest is what we want to be doing. So being able to recur it with trash for treasure, absolutely perfect for this deck. So finally, what we're going to do is we are going to take a quick look at the budget for this deck, and it wound up coming in at $99.90, which is just about the closest you can get to our budget limit as possible, and that's because of one major reason. That is Karn Silver Golem. So Karn Silver Golem is a reserved list card, which is why the price is so high up there. It's 5 mana for a legendary artifact creature, 4/4. Whenever Karn Silver Golem blocks or becomes blocked, it gets -4/+4 until end of turn. And you can pay 1, and target non-creature artifact is an artifact creature with power and toughness each equal to its casting cost until end of turn. So this is exactly what we want to be doing. Although I'll be perfectly honest here, $44, way too expensive for this deck. I did cheat a little bit, because if we're looking at Karn Silver Golem, there is a gold bordered version that is about $15. So I kind of snuck that one in instead of the regular black border one. So if your play group is okay with you using a gold border and you would like to spend a lot less money on this card, there is a cheaper version. That is the one I used for the budget of the deck. So if the gold border isn't your style, it would push this deck over $100. So definitely a little bit of a stretch there on my part. But I felt in this case that it worked, because it's still a printing of the card, and hopefully it's Commander. Not a lot of people are going to really care too much. So that is our total deck. And the final thing we're going to have to do is to jump into a game. We're going to test this deck against 3 separate opponents. We're going to run it up against Prosper, Tomebound, Tevesh Zat, Doom of Fools, and Yuriko, the Tiger's Shadow. So Prosper Tomebound is one of Bilal's newest decks. It focuses on casting cards out of exile, making sure that it is always generating treasures, always generating value, and just generally being able to cast a little bit more than he probably should be able to every turn. Tevesh Zat, Doom of Fools is Jason's partnerless Tevesh Zat deck. This is a through-and-through aristocrat deck. He wants to play a bunch of little creatures, sacrifice them, drain out his opponents, and just generally cause a lot of chaos on the board, a lot of little life triggers, and just kill a bunch of creatures. And then last we have Yuriko. This is Shawn's deck of the week, so he gets to play against his own suggested deck for this show. And this is a ninja tribal deck that wants to play a lot of split cards that have big mana costs, but a lot of little evasive creatures, so he can get in for some damage, trigger Yuriko, and then hit some very big spells off the top of his deck and do a ton of damage to his opponents. So I am very excited for this game. I think it's going to be tons of fun. I'm not quite sure which deck to worry about the most. I think if I had to take a pick, it would probably be Tevesh Zat, because it's difficult to keep our creatures on board with so many aristocrat strategies. But we'll see how it goes. I hope you guys enjoy the game, though, and I will talk to you once it's done. At the start of the game, Bilal goes first, followed by Jason, myself, and Shawn. On Bilal's first turn, he plays a command tower, and then casts Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer. Jason plays a swamp, I play a mountain, Shawn plays a swamp, and then casts Ginger Brute before attacking me for 1. Bilal plays a mountain, and then attacks Shawn for 2, creating a treasure, and exiling the top card of Shawn's library when it deals damage, allowing Bilal to cast it this turn. Unfortunately for Bilal, it's an island, so it just stays exiled. Jason plays a swamp and casts Sign in Blood, targeting himself to draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. I play a mountain. Shawn plays an island, and then goes to attack Bilal with Gingerbrute, hoping to ninjutsu in Yuriko, but before attacks can officially be declared, Bilal casts Stomp to destroy the Gingerbrute. In his second main phase, Shawn casts Price of Fame, destroying Ragavan and surveilling 2. Bilal plays a Swamp and then casts Prosper Tomebound, and in his end step, exiles Murderous Rider from the top of his deck thanks to his commander, and can cast it until the end of his next turn. Jason plays a Swamp and casts Bastion of Remembrance, creating a 1/1 human token, making it so that whenever his creatures die, it drains each opponent for 1. I play a Scavenger Grounds, and then cast Seize the Spoils, discarding a card to draw 2, making a treasure token. I then sacrifice the treasure to cast a Soul Ring. I follow that up by casting Tormod's Crypt, which can be sacrificed to exile target player's graveyard. On Shawn's turn, he plays a Path of Ancestry and casts Siren Stormtamer. Bilal taps 3 mana, plays Rakdos Carnarium, returning Command Tower to hand, and then uses his floating mana to cast Swift End, creating a treasure token with Prosper, destroying the Siren Stormtamer and losing 2 life. In his end step, he exiles Goldspan Dragon with Prosper. Jason plays a Swamp and casts Yawgmoth Thran Physician. I play a Desert of the Fervent and cast Hoarding Dragon, searching my library for treasure chest and exiling it until Hoarding Dragon dies. Shawn plays an island and casts Brainstorm, drawing 3 and putting 2 back on top of his deck. And he follows that up with a Scheming Symmetry, letting both him and I search our decks for a card and put it on top. Bilal replays Command Tower, and then casts the Goldspan Dragon, which lets his treasures create 2 mana, and makes another treasure with Prosper, before attacking Shawn for 4, creating another treasure. Second main phase, he uses 2 treasures to cast Bonecrusher Giant from exile, making another treasure with Prosper, and then uses another treasure, plus the 1 remaining floating, to cast Murderous Rider, creating yet another treasure. In his end step, Prosper triggers, exiling Felwar Stone. Jason casts a Read the Bones to scry 2, draw 2, and lose 2 life, and he then plays a Swamp and casts Soul Ring. On my turn, I play a Mountain and cast an Overloaded Mizium Mortars, doing 4 damage to each creature I don't control, killing everything but my dragon. When Jason's creatures die, he gains 2 life and the rest of us lose 2. I then move to combat, attacking Bilal for 4. Shawn plays a Bojuka Bog, exiling Jason's graveyard, and then cast Fairy Seer, scrying 2. Bilal plays a Den of the Bugbear, and casts Stolen Strategy, which lets him exile the top card of each opponent's library in his upkeep and cast them that turn. Jason plays a Swamp, and then casts Tevish Zot, Doom of Fools, activating his +2 ability to create 2 0/1 Thrall tokens. He follows that up with a Grim Tutor, searching his library for a card, putting it to hand and losing 3 life. On my turn, I play a Mountain, and then attack Tevish Zot for 5. In my second main phase, I cast my commander, Chandler. After that, I cast a Thrain Forge, which can be activated for 2 mana, turning a non-artifact creature into an artifact and giving it +1/+0. Shawn attacks Bilal for 1, and then before the damage, ninjutsus in Yuriko, returning Fairy Seer to hand and putting Yuriko into play in its place. Then, when she does damage, he reveals Ingenious Infiltrator from his library, doing 4 damage to each opponent and drawing a card. He then plays a Mortuary Mire, putting Siren Stormtamer on top of his deck, and recast Fairy Seer, scrying 2. In Bilal's upkeep, Stolen Strategies triggers, exiling Sheoldred Whispering One, Duplicant, and Siren Stormtamer. He then plays a Swamp and casts Jason's Sheoldred. In Jason's upkeep, he sacrifices a Thrall to Sheoldred's trigger, draining each opponent for 1, and then cast Zot's Will to force each opponent to sacrifice a creature with the greatest power, killing Sheoldred, Hoarding Dragon, and Yuriko. Then, since Jason also controls his commander, it exiles each opponent's graveyard and makes 6 Thrall tokens. And once that resolves, he activates Tevesh Zot's +1 ability to sacrifice a Thrall, drawing 2 cards and draining each opponent for 1. On my turn, I cast Treasure Chest and pass. Shawn attacks Jason for 1, ninjutsuing Yuriko in for the damage. This has him revealing an island from his deck, and he puts it to hand, doing no damage. He then recast Fairy Seer and scries 2. Finally, he casts Tetsuko Umezawa, making all his creatures with power 1 or less unblockable. In Bilal's upkeep, Stolen Strategies triggers, exiling a Swamp, Sunken Ruins, and Magda Brazen Outlaw. He then casts my Magda, and immediately follows that up with a Pyromancer's Goggles. Jason casts a Dread Presence, and then plays a Swamp, triggering the Dread Presence to do 2 damage to Magda and gains 2 life. He then casts a Pitiless Plunderer, which makes a treasure when his creatures die, and then activates Tevesh Zot's +1 ability to sacrifice a Thrall, draw 2 cards, make a treasure, and drain each opponent for 1. He then casts an Orzhov Enforcer, and at the end of turn, I activate Treasure Chest, sacrificing it, rolling a d20. I wind up rolling a 16, so I gain 3 life and draw 3 cards. On my turn, I play a Ghost Quarter and activate Thran Forge to turn Pitiless Plunderer into an artifact so that I'm able to cast a Braid and destroy it. That also drains all of Jason's opponents for 1, and once that resolves, I cast a Ruin Grinder. Shawn casts Discovery, surveilling 2 and drawing a card, but in response, Bilal uses Pyromancer's Goggles to cast Reverberate, copying it, which allows him to copy Discovery twice, ultimately letting him surveil 2 twice and draw 2 cards. Then Shawn's resolves, and he moves to combat, attacking Jason with everything since it's unblockable with Tetsuko. Before the damage, he ninjutsus in Ingenious Infiltrator for the Fairy Seer, doing 4 to Jason, drawing 2 cards thanks to the Infiltrator, and triggering Yuriko twice. This has him revealing Arcane Adaptation and Slitherblade, doing 4 total damage to each opponent. And in his second main phase, he casts the Arcane Adaptation, naming Ninja, turning all of his creatures into ninjas. In Bilal's upkeep, Stolen Strategies triggers, exiling Ayara, First of Loch Thwain, a Mountain, and Liliana Vess. He then plays a Swamp, and casts Liliana Vess and immediately activates her -2 ability to search his library for a card and put it on top of his deck. He then casts Urabrask the Hidden, giving his creatures haste and making his opponent's creatures enter tapped. Jason casts Sir Conrad the Grim, which deals 1 damage to each opponent whenever a creature enters any graveyard from anywhere, and then casts Plague Crafter, making each player sacrifice a creature or planeswalker. This kills a Thrall, Ruin Grinder, Ingenious Infiltrator, and Urabrask, doing 5 damage to Jason's opponents while he gains 1 life. This also allows everyone to discard their hands and draw 7 cards when Ruin Grinder dies, which Bilal and I do. Jason then activates Tevesh Zot's +1 ability, sacrificing a Thrall to draw 2 cards, gain a life, and do 2 damage to each opponent. And he plays a Swamp, triggering Dread Presence to do 2 damage to Shawn and gain 2 life. And he moves to combat, attacking Liliana for 3, killing the Planeswalker. This also means that Bilal stole a permanent from each of us, and Jason killed it every single time. On my turn, I play a Mountain, and cast Ichor Wellspring, drawing a card. I then cast a Trading Post, and I activate the Trading Post, sacrificing Ichor Wellspring to draw 2 cards. Then I cast Chain Reaction, doing 9 damage to each creature, which does 14 damage to myself, Shawn, and Bilal, killing him, while Jason gains 6 life. Jason also creates a 1/1 spirit token when the Enforcer dies. On Shawn's turn, he casts Slitherblade, Jace's Phantasm, and Fairy Seer, scrying 2. Jason attacks me for 1, and then casts Asmodeus the Archfiend before activating Tevishzat's +2 ability to create 2 Thrull tokens. On my turn, I play a Mountain, and then activate Trading Post to sacrifice Tormod's Crypt and draw a card. And then I cast an overloaded Vandal Blast to destroy all artifacts I don't control. However, with that on the stack, I activate Thran Forge to turn Jason's Thrall tokens in Asmodeus into artifact creatures. Still in response, Shawn casts Commit, putting Bastion of Remembrance second from the top in Jason's library, and Jason, not going down without a fight, cast Vona's Hunger to make each opponent sacrifice half their creatures rounded up, killing everything except Jace's Phantasm. Then the Vandal Blast finally resolves. On Shawn's turn, he casts Azra Smokeshaper, making Jace's Phantasm indestructible until end of turn, and recast Yuriko before attacking Tevishzat for 5. Jason plays a Swamp, and then casts Skull Sifter, which makes a 1/1 Eldrazi Scion token when his non-token creatures dies. And he follows that up with a Disciple of Bolas, sacrificing the Skull Sifter to draw 4 cards and gain 4 life. He then recasts Bastion of Remembrance, making a 1/1 human token, activates Tevishzat's +1 ability to sacrifice the human, drawing 2 cards and draining each opponent for 1. On my turn, I played Temple of the False God, cast Foundry Inspector, making all my artifacts cost 1 less, cast a Mirror Retriever, and cast a Mind Stone. I then activate Trading Post, sacrificing Mirror Retriever, drawing a card and returning Treasure Chest to my hand and casting it. I then activate Treasure Chest, sacrificing it, rolling a d20, and this time I roll a 5 to make 5 treasure tokens. Finally, I cast a Steel Hellkite and pass. Shawn attacks Jason for 9, and Jason blocks the Phantasm with the Spirit token, and before the damage, Shawn ninjutsus in Silent Blade Oni, so Jason takes 7. On damage, Jason reveals his hand, and Shawn casts a Falconwrath Noble for free. Then, Yuriko triggers twice, revealing a total of 10 mana value of spells from the top of Shawn's deck, doing 10 damage to Jason and I, knocking me out of the game. Then, in his second main phase, Shawn plays a Blood-Stained Mire, and then passes. Jason casts Erebos Bleak-Hearted, and follows that up with a Midnight Reaper, which draws a card and does 1 damage to Jason when his creatures die. And he activates Tevishzat's +1 ability to sacrifice Disciple of Bolas, lose a life, and draw 3 cards. He then casts a Woe Strider, making a 0/1 Goat token. On Shawn's turn, he casts Never to destroy Woe Strider, and in response, Jason activates Erebos, sacrificing his own Woe Strider to give Yuriko -2, -1 until end of turn. This draws Jason a card and loses him a life. He also activates Erebos, paying 2 life and drawing another card, and Shawn then casts Go for the Throat, killing the Midnight Reaper, and Jason draws another card with Erebos. He then moves to combat, and Shawn attacks Jason for 13, but Jason blocks the Oni with his Goat token, only taking 7 total. Then Yuriko triggers twice, revealing 2 mana worth of spells, doing 2 more damage to Jason. Shawn then plays an island and casts Demonic Tutor, searching his library for a card and putting it to hand. Jason plays a Cabal Stronghold, and then uses the Stronghold to cast a Hedron Archive and immediately sacrifices it to draw 2 cards. He casts a Thrull Carrier, and then activates Tevishzat's +2 ability to create 2 Thrull tokens. This lets him activate Erebos twice, sacrificing both of the thralls, giving Falconwrath Noble -4, -2 until end of turn, killing it. At the end of turn, Shawn sacrifices his Bloodstained Mire, losing a life and putting a land into play, and then he also casts Consign to return the Bastion of Remembrance to Jason's hand. On his turn, Shawn casts Azra Smokeshaper, giving Yuriko indestructible until end of turn, before attacking Jason for a total of 12. However, before the blocks, Jason casts Sudden Spoiling, turning all of Shawn's creatures into 0/2 creatures with no abilities, and Jason then blocks the Oni with Carrier Thrall. However, still before the damage, Shawn ninjutsus in Okiba Gang Shinobi, doing 3 total damage to Jason and forcing him to discard 2 cards, and in his second main phase, he recasts Jace's Phantasm. On Jason's turn, he plays a Memorial to Folly and activates Tevesh Zot's +2 ability to create 2 Thralls, before recasting a Bastion of Remembrance, making a human token, and then finally, he escapes Woe Strider from the graveyard, which lets him sacrifice enough creatures to drain out the rest of Shawn's life, winning Jason the game. Alright, so that was a pretty sweet game. We got to see some powerful moves by Chandler. I was a big fan of being able to turn random things into artifacts and destroy them with stuff like Vandal Blast. Obviously not the strongest deck in the world. It's definitely a little bit on the janky side, but it is tons of fun. And I had no issues losing in the way that we did. Yuriko hit some massive cards to kill us in the end, but we got to hit a chain reaction, kill off Bilal with some aristocrat triggers, and then eventually see some aristocrats close out the game. So I was right in my prediction that Tevesh Zot was the deck to worry about, but I do think that all the decks perform super well. Chandler himself is still a very weird card, but was a fun card. So if you guys have any suggestions for future videos, whether it's future cards that you would like to see, or maybe even some different formats that you might like to see, please do let me know. Like and subscribe to the channel, comment down below. And as always, you can also follow me over on Twitter. That's in the description of the video. You can follow me over on Reddit. That's also in the description. Send me an email if you have any questions about anything. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, the deck tech, the gameplay, and I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.